Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Psilocybin Says. This is Courtney Rose.
And Eric Osborne.
We are here with the beautiful Lorilee Binstock. Thank you so much for joining us today, Lorilee.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate it. I feel very honored to be invited on to speak with you two.
Well, now that you've got some psilocybin experiences under your belt, you fit right into the lineup. So, Courtney and I are eager to hear about the work that you've been doing with psilocybin. Maybe first, though, you could just give our audience a little more detailed information about the projects that you work on.
Well, I currently host a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast. I'm also editor-in-chief of Authentic Insider. So those are my main projects that I have continuously going. A Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast pretty much started. It was birthed post during the pandemic. And right after I received treatment for PTSD, I went into residential treatment in February of 2020 for childhood sexual abuse. I unknowingly struggled with that trauma for 25 years. And I had, my last suicide attempt was February 2020, which kind of put me in a position where I needed to get help. My husband was like, okay, we need to find you a treatment center where you can figure this out. And at this point, I didn't talk about my trauma, my PTSD. But I did. And he was like, we can find a way to work through this. And I went into treatment for 31 days in Arizona. And it was literally the best thing that could have happened to me. They say your breakdown becomes your breakthrough, and that was exactly what had happened. But when I was finally able to say what had happened to me, I actually gave others permission to be able to say what happened to them. A lot of them were like, me too, this happened to me, and I haven't talked about it either. And there were a number of things that kind of started the podcast, a lot of work that I was working on, TV scripts and stuff like that. But the podcast came from this whole idea of I need other people to know that they're not alone, because I felt for 25 years like I was the only person in the world who was sexually abused. And I was abused by my father, which made it even more difficult to say out loud. And now I can say it out loud, thank goodness. And I think that happened because of treatment. And, that started. The magazine started. I in one of my interviews, I interviewed someone who actually did do MDMA assisted therapy, and they connected me to that person, and so it goes. I started doing a lot of work with psychedelic. I know that MDMA is not considered a classic psychedelic, but I think that is actually what I needed to kind of move me forward into my mushroom experiences. But yeah, a lot of projects in the works. Psychedelic documentary. I feel like, yes, I got a lot of help from, all of these different holistic healing methods, but I feel like the psychedelics actually help put everything together. So yes, so I wanted to do a lot more in informing people about psychedelics and what that actually did for me. Yeah, I have a children's book that I'm working on. There's literally my brain, once I was able to uncover all the trauma, my brain just exploded with information that I needed to get out there.
Wow. There's so many questions I have for you. First, I
Please.
want to say, first, thank you for just opening right up to your experience with trauma and getting that specific. Right before you said, by me telling my story, it gave permission for other people to tell their story. That's exactly what I was thinking. Like, oh, yes, thank you, Lorilee, because that's it. By sharing our own experiences, it helps other people feel so much more comfortable sharing theirs. So thank you for doing that here for us.
Thank you.
Yeah. And that's aside from your psilocybin experiences. I mean, the real reason that I suggested that we speak with you is because you have just been so authentic. You've been so real with your story in the last year and a half or so that I've been following you in your work, and it's inspirational. It's incredible. So I want to just thank you for as much for helping others share their own as just for relieving the pressure for all of us. We are a collective, and as any of us moves forward in the healing process, we all move forward in the healing process.
Absolutely. Thank you. That touched me.
So maybe if you could share a little bit about MDMA. I appreciate how you expressed that MDMA allowed you to move into psilocybin, and I think there is a lot of value in exploring kind of what you mean behind that.
Well, my guide, we discussed MDMA because I think the trauma that I had experienced was still raw. Even though I was able to talk about it, there were still parts of it that was really, really difficult for me to understand and process and realize it wasn't my fault. Um, the thing about the MDMA, which this is what I was told, is that it suppresses your fear and anxiety part of your brain. So you're able to see everything with compassion. And that's kind of what really happened when I actually thought about the abuse that I had experienced from my father in my MDMA experience. It was like I was watching a film in my head of my father's childhood, and he had experienced abuse, and his, brothers and sisters had experienced abuse, and I wasn't angry at that point, and then I became I felt empathy. I felt bad for him, and it was just like he just didn't know better. For the longest time, I was angry. I'm not saying that I forgive him, but I understand what happened.
Mm.
And then I did the MDMA again. There was a lot to unpack there. But then I did the MDMA again about 4 months later. And then at that point I had cut off my mom because she was like, "Can you just forget what happened? Because we want to see our grandchildren." And I'm like, "No, I'm not bringing my grandchildren near you." Um,
Oh.
and then during that experience, even though it didn't, it's MDMA is said to not allow you to feel fear and anxiety, I was still feeling like some sadness. And I started imagining something bad happening to my daughter. And it was freaking me out. And I was like, "Oh, I don't want to feel this. Why am I feeling this?" And then, my therapist was like, "Okay, well, stay with that. Why are you feeling this? What are you connecting this to?" And immediately I was just like, my mother feels like she's lost me. And that the only way to not feel that awful feeling that I had felt was for her to pretend it never happened. So that was her using it as her survival mode. So I was able to move forward because I was angry. I was like, "Why the hell would my mom would say just forget about it?" But then after that second MDMA experience, it was like, I'm no longer angry at them, but I don't want to have anything to do with them because they're still toxic.
Mhm.
And I think I needed that to happen. I think I needed to be okay with it. Who knows what would have happened with the mushrooms? I could have felt more anger. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that the psilocybin tells you what you need to see or hear to understand. But I think at that moment, I needed more compassion for them for me to be able to move forward. Um, when I decided that my next session, I actually decided I wanted to do LSD because when I was younger, I actually had a really bad trip on mushrooms. And it was because I was 16. The abuse happened when I was about 10 years old. I literally suppressed it, never thought about it again. And when I was 16, I ate these mushrooms. Mind you, I was drinking and I was smoking pot. I was doing all kinds of stuff. I don't know if I even took other pills, but I saw the abuse and it wouldn't leave my brain. And it was terrifying. It was awful. And I really thought the only way I could get out of this is if, something bad happened to me. Luckily, my friends found me and we were okay. But it was an awful experience. And I'm like, I never want to do that again. Fast forward, 20 something years later, when I was watching a documentary about mushrooms, and they were telling you there was a healing component to it. I was like, wow, really? And then I thought about my own experience, and I was like, it was telling me that I needed to heal this childhood sexual abuse. I didn't want to think about it at that point, but the psilocybin said you needed to figure that out. So I was still a little iffy about doing the psilocybin. So I was really focused on the LSD, but we couldn't make the LSD session work. And they were like, we could do the psilocybin. And I was like, you know what? Just you saying that, I feel very open to that. And so let's do it. And I did it, and I had to set intentions each time. My guide therapist she says, let's set an intention. My intention was, I felt like I had a lot of trapped energy, a lot of trapped anger, a lot of trapped just sadness, just everything. And I just wanted it all released. So the psilocybin, I did it, and I literally cycled through every single emotion that you could possibly experience over and over again. I'm like, and what was interesting was the feeling of the anxiety, the fear. Those feelings, they felt like they lasted forever, and that the moments of like sheer joy was just so minimal. My guide later told me that it was basically equal parts each emotion. It just felt like more with the sadness and the anxiety. But she said after the fourth cycle that I went through it, I actually started involuntarily doing box breathing exercises and calming myself down. Like my brain immediately said, okay, we can work through this. And it was just, and now I'm able to go into box breathing or just remove myself from the situation instead of just really sitting in it because I don't know where to go. I have now these tools where I can shift my way of thinking. I mean, it doesn't happen all the time, but it happens so much more than it happened before. Yeah. So,
Wow. Two very different experiences between the MDMA and the psilocybin mushrooms. Like the healing that they bring comes in such different ways.
So different. It's so different. And it cleared my head. I felt like the psilocybin really cleared my head in a way that it made me understand that there are messages everywhere. I'm just not seeing it because it's just layered with everything that we're told that we need to do in life. 8 months before my psilocybin trip, I was interviewed by a woman who was like a medium for animals. And after our interview, she talked to me and was like, I have to tell you something. I'm getting some information from your maternal grandmother. I've never met my maternal grandmother ever. Like she died years, like 20 years before I was even born. She died a long time before I was born. And this woman said, she's telling you that you need to let go of what's happening. I'm seeing statues around you, and I'm seeing all of these things. And I'm like, what is she talking about? And then, I was like, okay, I don't know what she was talking about, so I'm just going to move on. We'll just close the conversation. During my psilocybin trip, I got a flashback of me when I was a child, when I was 12 years old. My family's from the Philippines, and my grandfather was living in the US with us, and he passed away. So when he passed away, we went to take his body to the Philippines. They don't have standards there. My mom wanted to dig up she wanted to create a mausoleum for my grandparents. And so this is very graphic, but they went to exhume the coffin, and it was like us and the family. I didn't know this was going to happen. So they exhumed her coffin was in tatters, and then they started pulling out her bones, and they started pulling out her, like, for like a 12-year-old child, this is traumatic.
Yeah.
So I'm like sitting there like, what the hell is happening? Nobody's talking to me about it. Nobody even told me that this was going to happen. And then I realized that during my mushroom trip, I was like, holy shit. That was my grandmother telling me I needed to let go of what was just happening, what I experienced, because nobody talked to me about it. No one said, like, it was just a shock. And so when my guide, my therapist, was just like, wait, you actually saw your grandmother's bones? And I'm like, yes. And I never talked about it. And I mean, we have pictures of it. And I remember being surrounded by these statues from tombstones. And so it was just insane to me that the mushroom
Wow.
showed me that too. So
Wow.
just incredible.
So clarification, this is your first mushroom trip you're
This is
describing.
my first mushroom trip.
Okay.
Yes. It was done November.
And how did you process that? How did you integrate and work with the material that came out of that?
I realized that there was just a lot of things that happened in my childhood that were wrong. And if they weren't wrong, they weren't discussed with me. No one told me, like, that, you know, they're going to exhume my grandmother's body and I'm just going to see it. No one, and that kind of developed into all of the other things that I was just told to do, but was never talked to about these things. Like, you do this, no questions asked. You experience this, no questions. Just you deal with it, kind of thing. And I realized that that's not. I need to be curious about everything that happens. If there is a feeling that I'm experiencing, that I need to be curious about it, and I need to wonder where that feeling's coming from, and I can question it. And if I feel like it's coming from an outside source, I need to be okay with saying, hey, you said this, and this didn't sit well with me. Like, I think at that point it was really all about resolving any kind of personal turmoil. Because honestly, when I would, and this happened to me right after that mushroom trip, someone said something along the lines, like, one of my friends, like, oh, you put too much pressure on your kids. And I absorbed that and was just like stewing on it for days. Do I put pressure on my kids? So I like talked to my daughter and I was like, do you feel like I make you do all of these different sports, or are these the things that you want to do? And she was like, well, I do it to make you happy. I was like, oh, that's not the answer I wanted. I want you to want to do these things. And then I got to explore that. And then that evolved into a discussion about how I want my daughter to do things that make her happy, not what makes other people happy. And then I was able to talk to my friend about, like, that comment that you made was not cool. And then she was just like, I honestly didn't mean for it to be malicious. It was just something that I was thinking, and I said it, and I should probably have been better about how I said it, or not said it at all. And I was able to move past that. And I think that's with everything in life.
Wow. I just want to take a moment to just like honor your process and recognize how the word that comes to my mind is just beautiful. The evolution of your journey is, and hearing you talk about intergenerational stories and ways of going about life, and just like cultural things that have been passed on to you, passed on to your mother from her parents, and then on to you. And then now you're having the self-awareness to recognize where, like, okay, wait a second, like, this is where I get to pass it on to my daughter or not, or do
Right.
things differently. And it's just such an amazing process and ability that you're tapping into that is just so awesome.
Oh, well, thank you. It's a lot. It's a lot to unpack. I think we're like, we want to do what's best for our child, but sometimes we don't have the self-awareness to know
Mhm.
that. And I feel like the psilocybin actually really was like, yes, I'm we I it opened my mind to all of these things that weren't even a thought before.
In a recent retreat that we had, there was a lady there who was sharing some similar uh, background, and she mentioned her grandmother saying, kind of similar to your mother, like, so let's just forget about all that. Let's just keep the peace. Let's just keep the peace.
Mhm.
And it struck me. I remembered my grandmother and how much I could see her. I can still see her biting her tongue to keep the peace, and thinking, how many peacekeeping grandmothers and mothers, because they didn't want to upset the man of the house or whatever, have just passed down this, dysfunctional behavior or trauma,
Mhm.
however you want to look at it. And it's, I'm grateful that we're in a time where that's shifting drastically, and we have women are more so able to speak. And I still find myself, having to forget or unlearn
Mhm.
patterns of behavior, to allow even my children to speak for themselves. Right, that was another thing. Like, children be
Yeah,
seen, not heard, and
right.
and the women just put up with all the bullshit. And yeah, it's I feel gratitude for your husband as well, because I feel like he must be someone that is, obviously allowing you that space to really not only work through your process, but to share it publicly. You
Yeah.
know, so
Yeah.
yeah, lots of respect for him and you in this situation.
Thank you. Yes,
Can
he is a good man. Yeah. So I
can
appreciate him.
can you take us into your second experience with mushrooms? They're seldom the same.
No, they were this one was very drastically different. I tried to set my honestly, I the ignorance that I had thinking like, I think I've healed all my trauma. I think I can move forward and now just think about what I can do for myself and, like in my in creating things. I was so wrong. Mushrooms were like, no, no, you still have a lot more to work through. And it really showed me that I had a lot of fear that I was still harboring from so many um things. That was the theme, fear. Like, I was like, "Oh, this is gonna be a great trip, and I'm going to be able to do all these wonderful things with whatever I process." No, it was like, "Let me show you how much fear you still are holding." And, I was getting flashbacks of my childhood. There have been a lot of, um, suicides, in my life, friends, um, very odd, deaths, someone it was there was just a lot. And so in processing that, I'm like, why am I seeing all of this stuff? I was seeing that the reason why I guess I gave up. So this is my fear. My fear is that I would experience some sort of failure, or I would experience some sort of sadness, or I would experience something that I did not want to feel, and I would just give up. Um, and it just showed me so many things, but the fear was the main thing. And in weeks after, it still showed me fear. And right now, that was just a couple weeks ago when I did that mushroom trip.
Okay.
Um, and I'm realizing I have this fear of money, like a really, really innate fear of money. And it's because, um, I felt like it was used against me a lot to like, well, I'll give you this, but you have to do this or whatever. Um, and it was interesting because throughout the whole week, this is something that came up last week, this idea of money. I get very uncomfortable talking about money and numbers. Someone passes me a check like at a restaurant, and they're like, "Hey, figure out tip." I immediately freak out inside, and I'm like, "Okay, sure. Where's my phone?" Like, "Oh, you can't figure out the 20% of that?" And honestly, I probably could, but um, as a child, when and I don't know if this is how it is in the public school system, wherever. I know that it's different, but I used to be timed to do math problems. Like it was like, okay, you have, and it would freak me out. And my mom, when she would teach me math, because my mom had zero patience for me, she would literally slam her hand on the desk and scream at me, and I would cry. And then I would just have so much anxiety when it came to anything with numbers. Um, and the reason why I noticed the difference between how I was raised to look at numbers and how for instance, my daughter, she goes to a school that's based on field education. You do the work, you have a curriculum, and you go out, you have field trips almost every day to work on that. So one of the things that the kids do who are working with multiplication, they take them to Costco. They figure out, the unit, how can you get the best bang for your buck? You figure out the units, how much each bulk thing costs. And what they do is then they figure it out, they buy it, and then they package it up and they deliver it to the homeless shelters. And I'm like, that is just a beautiful way to just teach children, instead of saying you need to do this at a time. Like, why are people timing me to do math?
Does this school have a website? Because I need to study this.
I feel like most schools should be doing it that way. Like, then when they're learning about anatomy, they go to an open heart surgery. They are able to be in an amphitheater to see it. Like, this is the work that they do there. I was just like, oh my God, why didn't they have this for me when I was growing up? Because it's like, you do the work and you're like, why do I need this? But they actually show you. So, and yes. So,
yeah. I'm getting some trauma flashbacks to Sister Bernadine and her ruler on my hand
for sister
algebra. Oh God.
Yes.
I have similar issues around numbers and money.
Maybe that's why I like Excel spreadsheets so much, because I didn't experience that.
You're so lucky.
I fucking
panic. I mean, it wasn't the best experience. Like, we didn't go on Costco field trips to like do, public service projects and all that, but we sat in a desk and crunched numbers on a timer. But
really, yeah,
I did not. I was very fortunate. I did not get, scrutinized for
reprimanded.
What was your intention going into that mushroom trip? You didn't. You kind of like alluded to it, but you didn't say directly.
Oh my. Okay, so in going into it, so I wanted to grow what I'm doing, my business as a creator. I am terrified of business. The idea of business, like numbers, it's like that's what it is. But I knew I had potential, and this is something that I also saw in my psilocybin trip. Everyone telling me you have so much potential, but I never ever followed through, because in my house, failure was never an option. If you failed, I'm pulling you out. Like, you did swim class and you almost drowned. You're not doing swim class anymore. You're doing gymnastics and like you got hurt and cried. We're pulling you out. Like, this was the message that I've gotten my entire life as a child. So the thing with business is it's money, and it scares me. And therefore, this is what has been holding me back literally forever. Even when I got my first job out of college, I was a reporter, and I was making like very little money, but they were paying for my suits and my hair and my makeup. But I was literally living off a box of pizza for a week and eating ramen. So it was, and I was like, oh, that's okay. That's okay. I can totally work for free because I'm very fortunate that I even am able to get this job. Um, and that's kind of how I looked at everything I did. I worked for free a lot.
Mm.
And I think there's a point where I was just like, it's okay. I'm doing the podcast for free. It's no big deal. I'm creating this magazine for free. It's no big deal. I want people to be able to, hear other people's experiences and know that they're not alone. And I think that's enough. But then there becomes a point where I'm creating these things and it's taking away the time I can be spending with my children, or
Mhm.
I could be doing other things to help my children while they are at school. And then I started to feel kind of resentful of how much work I was doing for free, literally for the majority of my life. Always scared to ask for a raise, always terrified. And when they would lowball me, I'll be like, yeah, sure, they're offering me something. And so I was, and in something like a business and trying to create that yourself, I had a lot of fear with the money, with just failing. And because the thing is with business is you have to fail to grow. You have to fail to learn. Nobody taught me that. That's literally something that I'm unlearning
Mhm.
constantly. I need to be okay with failing.
And publicly, most likely.
Yes, very much so. Very much so.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
There's a
yeah.
big one. I heard a TED Talk recently with an entrepreneur, a successful entrepreneur, a female, talking about fortunate. She grew up with her dad asking her every single day when she got home. He would ask her, "Okay, tell me what you failed at today," and she was like, well, this and that didn't go very well," and he'd go, "Great. All right, let's try it again." And then if she couldn't come up with anything that she failed at, he'd be like, "Okay, come on, like let's just."
I know there's something you fucked up.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah, but in like reframing it in a very positive way, like it's great to fail. It's good to make mistakes. Like it's a great thing. It's part of life.
Yeah.
So that sticks with me.
So this is really interesting, though. Your intention going into the trip was, as it sounds like, was kind of creative focus, business development. How do I expand and improve my projects and what I'm doing? And it sounds like you were saying that you felt like you were going to go into this with like this kind of like maybe like all this creativity come out of it, all this inspiration come out of it, and you got slaughtered with fear, right? But now, as you're stepping back from it and you're acknowledging how this confrontation with your fear directly relates to your business.
Exactly. My brain was blown.
This was only 2 weeks ago?
The intelligence
This is
behind
2
the
weeks
mushroom.
ago.
Wow,
I can't
you've come a
even
long
explain
way
it.
in your integration process already.
Oh yeah. I'm literally just sitting there just like, oh, like light bulbs every day. Like that makes a lot of sense.
So in the trip, in the mushroom experience, what you said, it was fear around death and something happening to your children and that kind of stuff. Is that right?
Well, that was it was mostly failure. I think
Okay.
I think that I had a reasonable amount of fear because of certain things that I've experienced in my childhood with losing, people in my life. So I had, my guide validated that fear. Of course you're fearful. You had these experiences, but you're not in those experiences anymore. That was that. And so it was more of separating myself from that. And understanding, yes, of course I had fear because of certain things that have happened in my life. And then it kind of moved on to failure and the fear for failing. And even though I failed and I was pulled out and all of that stuff back then, it was like now I don't have to be in the past. That was before I can unlearn all of those things that I learned, that I was hammered into my brain that, failure is not good. And so it was the integration part was, what's happening in my life now where I need to fear all of these things? And the answer is nothing. There is no reason, there's nothing stopping me except for my past experiences. And I just need to I need to let go of that. Validate the fact that yes, I had reason to have fear back then. It was wrong that I was pulled out of things because I failed, because failure was not an option. But I need to understand that they didn't understand when they were pulling me out of these things and telling me that failure was not an option, is that there was this ability to grow. And I think that's what needed to really really show me what I need to do, is just be able to let go of all of that.
I'm just continually amazed by what seems like an intelligence in the medicine itself.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny how, we set these intentions, which, there's a lot of value, and I find it very helpful to have an intention in going into my experiences, but I don't think they've ever worked out like I thought they were going to work out, but somewhere down the road, you see these pieces start to come together, and it's like, oh, it is actually moving in that direction, just not in the way that I expected it to.
Right.
Were you in this second one in particular? Were you resistant to the experience, the fear, or did you just give yourself over to it? How do you feel about that?
I gave myself over to it. I felt it fully. It's interesting that you said that. Yes, I feel like you can set an intention and it will happen. It's just the problem is setting the expectation.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's what the issue was with me, thinking like, oh, my intention is to grow. And like you said, find all this inspiration and all that. But that's not what needed to happen. I needed to let go of the fear. The fear was what was holding me back.
And the fear is it's preventing the growth, right? So now that you've
Exactly.
gone through the fear, you'll get through the growth. It reminds me of this experience that I've been talking about a little bit here lately in private circles. I don't think I've talked about it publicly, but I had a experience in Jamaica maybe 2 years ago. Courtney was away, and I was going to take a dose with a buddy. And, I went into this experience just like, show me joy. I'm ready to just embrace life and experience joy. And the trip itself rapidly turned into 6 of the most terrifying, grueling, nightmarish hours of my life. I completely thought I was on a prison planet, and the only way out was to kill myself. And like there's like still a little kernel of self-preservation that's just like, okay, I get through this, get through this, get through this, get through this. The next day, after I started processing the experience with the person who I had dosed with, it was like this cloud just started to lift. And I had about maybe 6 weeks of the most pure joy that I have ever experienced in my life. And it's still like, I don't know, like what I did, similar to yours, I came to understand that my paranoia was that, this kind of fear that the world's out to get me and that it's an unsafe place is what prevents me from experiencing that life of joy. And until I could directly face that, just like your fear, until I could directly face that, I was not going to be able to experience the joy that I was looking for. And it's just, it is just amazing. The intelligence, the roundabout way that we go at getting to the answer. We have the subconscious almost has to trick the conscious mind in order to get over those hurdles or to be able to see those hurdles. Because like we're always like because the conscious mind is so powerful, it's able to just shove all that shit aside. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, you lived for how many years being able to not be conscious of, you
Yep.
know,
The abuse. Yeah.
yeah, insane. So it's just, yeah, the mind is an incredible thing.
That reminds me a lot of, have you all ever heard of progressive muscle relaxation?
Yes. Yeah.
And part of that is where you clench,
Mhm.
like you tighten your muscles, like, and then by doing that over and over, you can progressively relax more and more and more.
Yeah.
That came up for me hearing both of you talk about those experiences, and just like, that's kind of like facing the fear. Like, okay, here we
Yes.
go. I'm gonna go right into it, and then I can come out on the other side more relaxed.
Absolutely.
Very
I
interesting.
absolutely believe that.
So you touched on something else earlier that didn't see coming at all, but I can't help but go back to it, and that is the animal medium. And I'm I'm curious what your kind of engagement with, I don't know, the other world is. What's your philosophy around spirituality, or just all of that?
You know, since my I feel like I was pretty agnostic for a lot of my life. I grew up Catholic, and then, I felt like I was agnostic, and I converted to Judaism. Um and but I do feel that we're all everything, well, it's fact that we are all made of energy, right? And I feel like that energy doesn't necessarily, like, die with us. That energy flourishes. I mean, I'm still working through it, right? I'm still understanding it. When I imagine my daughter asking me, like, what happens when you die? I imagine telling her, like, we are put back into the ground, then we feed the soil that creates the plants, creates the trees, that creates the oxygen that helps us, you know, like, live. And a lot of that I feel like is true. Well, obviously, I think that's mostly like science, but I do believe that our energy um, is dispersed. Um, Sometimes I kind of toy in my mind with reincarnation, but I'm not really sure. I feel like we do leave energy um, on this earth, um, but I'm not 100% sure how. It's one of those things I'm just continuously working on.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever had a psychic kind of encounter like that previously?
I have not, actually. She found me. I spoke to a trauma survivor. She was a sexual assault survivor. She worked with horses, and she met this woman somewhere online. And apparently, she was able to. She's just an empath, pretty much, just very intuitive. But she does, and I think she reads people's energy, and she also reads, like, animals' energy. Um, so I've never had an experience there, with any type of mediums. That was one of my first, but I found her to be spot on, not necessarily at that moment, but I feel like she was telling me something. She felt something that she needed to tell me, and I mean, I can find there were pictures taken at in my grandmother's gravesite, and I can tell you that I was surrounded by statues. And when she said that, I'm like, what is she talking about? Um, but 8 months later, it was like, oh, she had something there, and so that was really interesting for me to
Wow.
to read. So
I'm really curious about your experience with interviewing other trauma survivors and how that has impacted your healing process over the past couple of years? Because you said it was 2020 that you began Trauma Survivor Thriver and Authentic Insider.
Well, Authentic Insider 6 months later, so January
Okay.
2021 was Authentic Insider. It's interesting because actually the woman who introduced me to the medium, she her abuse happened more recently than mine, and she didn't at that point had worked through it as well as I had continuously. She just didn't have the means, which I'm glad she found this woman. But when I was speaking to her, because I speak to trauma survivor thrivers, right? She was still working through what was happening. But what I learned is I asked questions, not on the podcast, just offline, that were triggering for her. And so I learned that there's still a lot I need to learn in how to talk to trauma survivors. It's so different than talking to trauma survivor thrivers. They've probably worked on their trauma for many years. And so in speaking with this person who had just experienced trauma within the last year or two and who hadn't been able to get the help, I found myself in a very difficult situation where I was like, I am really triggering this person right now. I thought I was able to speak to anybody about trauma, but there was still a lot that I needed to learn, which was great because she actually wrote a book, How to Talk to a Sexual Assault / Rape Survivor. So I was like, I have to get your book. And yeah, there was just a lot there that I needed to unpack and learn. And, it is difficult talking to somebody on your podcast. And now my podcast is live on Fireside Chat. And so that's why I try to have questions available beforehand and make sure that they are comfortable speaking about certain things. Because the last thing you want to do is trigger someone, especially in a vulnerable spot where there are people who can ask questions, people who can, who are hearing this live. It's really, I still have a lot to learn. I think it's just constant learning, and people operate differently. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you made that distinction that you speak with trauma survivor thrivers. I just kind of connected with me. I mean, this should be obvious, I suppose, but how big that difference can be between just like getting through day to day, living with trauma versus being on the other side, living with it, but having all those coping mechanisms in place to have moved past it.
Right.
It sure doesn't seem like you have a lot of fear because you really put yourself out there in some pretty open situations. I mean, to do a live podcast, to admit several times here on this podcast, kind of failings and whatnot. It's pretty commendable. Seems like you're doing a pretty good job in getting over or getting through those fears.
It's a psilocybin. I'm telling you, like I did a lot of work in residential treatment with somatic experiencing and all this integrative work, but it wasn't as easy to connect it until after the psilocybin. Like that, it was just like whoop, it like fused parts of my brain that was just like not connecting, and it was just like, this makes sense now. And I do have fear. I'm working on it. It's a constant struggle. But man, light years difference.
Well, I think, what is it? There's some kind of line that I'm searching for. But basically there's no one that doesn't experience fear, but there's a difference between people who experience fear and shy away from it and people who experience fear and have the courage to move through it.
Yes.
And that's what creates success. So as long as we're willing to do that continuously, then whatever we're doing will be successful. It may, like our intentions, may shift and not look like what we expected it to look like. But if we're willing to, collect data, shift our perspective and change our behavior and learn and grow, just like you're talking about doing with your children and everything else, then we will be successful.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, is there a person on this planet that doesn't experience fear? I mean,
I'd be interested to know who this person is.
Wouldn't we all kind of just be like dead? Because if we don't feel,
and probably the ones that pretend like they don't are the most terrified. They're terrified of their fear being exposed.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
I mean, I'm still scared every time I eat mushrooms. I'm just like, what the fuck's going to happen? I mean, that one that I had, like I was talking about, that was 7 grams. It wasn't a huge dose for me. Just like hanging out on the beach, going to eat some mushrooms and have a good time. Just absolutely beyond terrifying. And so, the power of this sacrament or this medicine, we just have to recognize that going in and hopefully give ourselves over to it as much as we can. Do you have any kind of a handle on what you think your future work with the mushroom might look like? Do you expect to go back soon? Do you feel like you're going to need a lot of processing before you do?
I feel like I'm processing a lot right now. I mean, it's only been 2 weeks and I feel just overwhelmed with so much information that I need to integrate. So I mean, in talking to my therapist, my guide, I feel that, quarterly, like 4 times a year, give myself a lot of time to be able to process. And, after my first experience with mushrooms, it was in November. So 4 months later, I felt like I was ready. Like right now, like if someone was like, hey, do you want to do a session? I'd probably be like, I'm not ready. Because I think right now it told me so much and I need to be able to process that before I'm able to, I think I'll know. And so, probably in the next 4 months, maybe. And, I'm really, really thinking about kind of trying LSD. I think the mushrooms have told me a lot, but I'm kind of curious what the LSD wants to tell me.
Have you ever worked with LSD?
I did as a child. I did when I was like 17 years old. And it's funny because, before my wedding with my husband, which was an amazing day, I would always say, man, that day when I was on LSD was literally the best day of my life. Like it was just everything. It was like everything that could go right went right. It was just an incredible, incredible experience. And a little bit of me is like, I don't ever want to try it again because I don't want to like taint that memory of like how amazing that day was. But then another part of me is just like, well, is it going to tell me something different? Is it going to show me something that, the psilocybin won't show me? But I definitely, I plan to try. I plan to continue working with psilocybin, but I think I'm very open to seeing how LSD will work with, what it has to say.
Did you notice how Eric asked that? Have you ever worked with LSD?
I'm just saying the big question that I have with LSD is how many best days of my life can I actually have?
Right.
Like, is it really endless? Can I have as many best days of my life as days that I take LSD? Because that's what it seems like. I've said for years, I'm going to build my career on psilocybin and retire into LSD.
Just laughing. We were living in Jamaica. It was like, if there was any indicator that it was going to be a great day, it was like, I'd hear Eric say, this is a good day to eat some LSD, right? Is anybody with me?
Yeah, no, it's something I should not have on hand. That's probably psilocybin is my favorite. I love it. It has been so good to me and it's taught me so much and has brought so much healing into my life. And MDMA has been a beautiful, beautiful tool to work with as well. But I never understand when people are like, "Oh, LSD lasts too long." I'm like, what? You don't want 14 hours of fucking bliss? Like,
I know. I'm like, whoa, no, it's going away.
yeah,
I remember that feeling.
So it sounds like you have a someone to help you with integration. You mentioned a therapist, or what's your integration process?
Yeah.
I work with a therapist, and my integration is with an internal family systems therapist.
Okay.
So we work with the different parts of me that feel the extreme feelings or just any feelings. I don't know if you saw that movie Inside Out.
Yes, I have seen that.
Yes, so it's like all the different parts and how the different parts, even though anxiety and fear and worry are like just like you don't like those feelings. I think IFS it teaches you how to work with them and why they're important and how they can work with your other parts that you're more in favor of, but to kind of keep them in harmony, because the thing is our part when during the psilocybin trip those parts come up, so it's good to be familiar with those different parts and where like the anxiety, where did it stem from, and finding that and healing that, negotiating, like kind of like it's like working with your inner child, because most of all of these feelings that we experience come from an experience from our childhood. So it's pretty much healing that, finding the root to where those feelings came from, and kind of healing that part, that root.
I love that.
Do you find yourself more able to reframe current experiences in a different light?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's crazy. Like after my first mushroom experience, I was like, I don't even recognize myself right now. Like, I would really be mad at what's happening right now, but I'm like, I can move past this because it's not the end of the world. So, yeah.
Wow, this has been a really great conversation.
Yeah, I knew it would be.
Yeah.
Oh, I love talking to you guys. You guys are just amazing couple. I love the work that you guys are doing too.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Likewise. Yeah, so let's save some more conversation for another episode down the road here.
Yeah, I'd love to have you guys on.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I am. I mean, I can. Do you want to ask?
Oh, you can ask.
All right. Lorilee, what does psilocybin say to you?
I believe psilocybin tells me a lot of things, but I feel like when it really comes down to it, it tells me to just be, be who I am authentically, not what society tells me to be, not what my friends want me to be, not what my parents expected me to be, not even what my negative experiences kind of dictate how I need to become. I think it just tells me to be, and what I love about the psilocybin, it says to just be, but it also shows me how. And I think that is pretty powerful.
This whole being, right? There's an entire vein of philosophy around the verb to be, right? Être in French, like it's more. I have found back when I used to study French that exploring this concept of being was easier in that language because there's just the ability to have a little bit more of a nuanced kind of experience with it. And this is also an interesting example of something I was listening to this morning around Taoist philosophy, in that, and it's also blends through into the quantum world, that, like energy, you brought up energy, right? As soon as we say the word energy, we actually detract from what it means, right? What it is from its essence. And so this being, as we try to explore what it means to be, and then we look at all the different parts of ourself that are being simultaneously. And the more we try to be something, then the further we get away from being, right?
Mhm.
So this just be is, I feel like, one of the most powerful, and if to get really like almost religious here, the most powerful manifestation of God, right? Or whatever we perceive of God and creation. The tree is not trying to do anything other than just be a tree. The
Mhm.
dog is just being a dog. And yet we humans are trying to be something all the time. But when
Yes.
we just be, like you said, that's when we're most powerful. That's when we bring our gifts to the world. That's when we attract all of the goodness into our lives. So thank you for being, and continue to just be Lorilee.
Amen. I love what you just said there. That was amazing. Thank
A
you.
lot of being.
Yeah, I was just being. I wasn't. I was just being.
To be or not
It
to
is so.
be.
It's so serious. It's true. I've been doing these
That's the
live.
question.
That's the question.
I've been doing these live on psilocybin live streams, and what is really interesting, and I'm just maybe we'll wrap up on this because I know we can keep on talking, I'm sure, but I'm curious if maybe in your experience doing the live podcasts, I feel like I'm starting to get more comfortable in just being me, and the conversations and everything just goes better, and like I find myself actually saying things that have seem to have more value because I'm just in that flow state of just
Mhm.
letting it go. And so as you switched over, just as kind of working in kind of a similar platform here, what have you found to be different, or comparing your pre-recorded to your live recorded podcast? How's that compare?
Exactly what you said. I feel like when I'm doing the live show, I'm not worried about, "Oh, did I say, a million times?" I and what and then I edit, and I'm like, I could just, like, just throw it all in there if I'm recording it and then I edit it, but, when I have this opportunity to edit, I wanna make it better,
Mm-hmm.
instead of just letting it be. So so with the live shows, it's just I just go with it, and I don't prep as much with the live shows. You know, I used to provide a lot of questions for my guests, and mostly because I'm working with, trauma survivors, so I just wanna make sure everyone's okay, and so I will in sending a draft, say, can we talk about this? Can we talk about this? If so, we're just going to let the conversation flow freely. And that's basically what we do. I have an intro and an outro, and the conversation I just let be. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, we will make sure and post links to your show and all of your social media, etc., in our show notes. And
Ah,
really grateful for you spending your time with us and all the work that you do, and look forward to sharing all of your work with our listeners.
Yeah,
Thank you.
definitely.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
You guys, I'm grateful to both of you. So, thank you.
Likewise. Have a wonderful day, and look forward to talking with you again soon.
All right. Talk
All right.
soon.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.